Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today is the fourth day of August, 2025. Thank you, as always, for joining us for another edition of Crime in the Courtroom. I'm your host, John Collins, and as we approach our 100th episode, we have another really interesting topic to discuss that I think will be useful to those of you working as scientists or administrators in forensic science laboratories, but also to those of you who may serve as sworn police commanders overseeing forensic laboratory operations. And for those of our viewers and listeners who do not necessarily work directly within the criminal justice system, I think you may appreciate getting an inside perspective of how our forensic science laboratories are managed and funded and some of the issues that they face. What I hope to do today is persuade you that we need to think about some things a bit differently and perhaps take a different approach to how we ensure the reliable and timely providing of forensic science services to our investigators on the streets, as well as within our courtrooms all across the United States that depend on expert forensic conclusions in the adjudication of criminal cases, both violent crimes and property crimes. But first, let me take a moment to extend my sincere thanks to our friends and colleagues at Promega, host of the International Symposium on Human Identification, the largest conference in existence dedicated to the practice, challenges, and opportunities of forensic DNA testing. As I mentioned in our last episode, we will be in Palm Beach, Florida this year. That's November 3rd to the 6th. And I really hope to see a lot of you there, as I'm going to be working with my very dear and esteemed colleagues, Pam Marshall, Julie Sikorsky, and Ray Wickenheiser, in delivering a leadership workshop for forensic DNA managers, as we've done for a number of years now. But this year is exciting for us because, along with the support of Promega and the organizers of ISHI 2025, we have formed a team that has now been officially named the Forensic Leadership Alliance, and it will be our responsibility and our privilege to support and encourage the development of leadership and professional effectiveness competencies in the community of forensic DNA practitioners and, of course, beyond DNA, not only in the United States, but around the world. It's really very exciting, and I'm really grateful to be part of this important project. So to that end, I will have Pam and Julie and Ray joining me for our next episode, and you'll get to hear us kick around some ideas and observations about what's happening in the arena of forensic laboratory administration. So please join us for that episode. And remember that our friends and colleagues at Promega are turning questions into discoveries each and every day. Learn more at promega.com. And for information about our upcoming symposium in November, please visit ishinews.com. That's ishinews.com. So my busy season is now upon me. So I have quite a few commitments that are coming up this fall, and I know some of you will be joining me, and I'm really looking forward to that. In fact, this week, 2 days from now, I'm going to be driving up to Mackinac Island, Michigan, to speak at a gathering of folks from the Michigan Counties Association. I'm very much looking forward to that. For those of you that have never been to Mackinac Island, Michigan, you need to go. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. And we're going to be staying at the Grand Hotel, which is literally a world famous hotel right there on the island. If you've never been to Mackinac Island, you may not know that they don't allow cars. So they have a lot of horse-drawn carriages. You kind of feel like you went back in time. So I'm really looking forward to that. So I'll be speaking on Thursday of this week, just a few days from now. I will then, the following week, be heading down to Miami, Florida for the Administration and Leadership Academy for Government Supervisors. I'm going to be popping out to New Mexico in a few weeks for the Strength-Based Leadership and Teamwork workshop. I'll be doing an expert witnessing class in Los Angeles or near Los Angeles, and then I'm also hoping to be speaking at a conference in Chicago. So there's a lot going on, and obviously very grateful for it. And for those of you that are watching and listening, if you're going to be at any of these events, I'm looking forward to seeing you. To that end, with regards to my interactions with with clients and students and coaching clients and that sort of thing. I cannot begin to tell you the number of emails, phone calls, and uh, and text messages that I've exchanged with colleagues about the political and operational turbulence that seems to have become the norm in Washington, D.C. And please know that I am sensitive to the fact that there are differing views on this and differing views about the kinds of things our federal tax dollars should or should not be invested in. Many of you, like me, saw the image of of Elon Musk waving a chainsaw, which he seemed to intend would be a symbol for the rapid and dramatic cutting of federal spending. And although I'm not an expert on federal budgets, federal authorizations and appropriations, like many of you, I'm informed enough to know that many federal expenditures are absolutely vital, not only to the functioning of the federal government, but to the quality of life of every United States citizen. And at the same time, we can appreciate that federal spending can be very careless and undisciplined at times. And when that happens over the course of decades, you get not only the building of public debt and the huge interest obligations that come with that debt, but you also get a dangerous sort of developing of institutionalized spending habits that become entrenched and very difficult to correct, which you might say is where we are now and have been for quite some time. And the result is that the federal funding needed to provide for things like national defense and social security and law enforcement and many other important functions of government becomes increasingly hard, even impossible, to appropriate without the building of more debt. And I remember a history class that I took in college in which we discussed the opinions of philosophers, and this was centuries ago, who predicted that this American experiment would eventually fail when citizens and their representatives used their votes to secure what they called largesse from the Treasury. In other words, when you get to the point, which seems to be where we are right now, that it becomes impossible to garner enough votes to reach public office unless you are willing to distribute tax revenues to your voters, then you have a political system that is in decline. And so spending at all levels of government has become an addiction to some extent. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. Although some listeners and viewers might not like the way that rings to their ears. But you can argue that it's an addiction, and whether or not we can fix that problem is quite debatable, but we certainly have to try. So that brings us to what is happening in our nation's capital right now. And because it deals with forensic science, it's not a topic that you're going to see on the nightly news very much, if at all. So the average citizen is not going to be aware of it and is not going to fully understand how it might affect her or his quality of life or that of their families. And this is that federal funding programs aimed at supporting the operations of forensic science laboratories has been adversely impacted by the political scene in Washington right now. And keep in mind here that we are talking about the laboratories where crime scene evidence is analyzed and from where expert witnesses come to court to testify to their results, which obviously impacts the integrity of any criminal proceeding that might rely on scientific expert testimony. And there are certainly a lot of those proceedings. There is a very active and important organization that advocates for the funding and support of forensic science in Washington, D.C., which is called the Consortium of Forensic Science Organizations, or the CFSO. And so for those of you who may be newer to the criminal justice system or newer to our forensic science laboratories, the CFSO began in 2000, 25 years ago now. And I know that because I was in the room when the idea for the organization was being pitched to the board of directors of the American Society of Crime Laboratory directors. And it was purely by coincidence that I was even there. I was doing some work as an editor with the ASCLD Communications Committee, and I was going to be giving a brief report to the board, and I just happened to witness what really became a historic moment. And what came out of that was a rather powerful and influential uh, coming together of major forensic science organizations to pound the pavement in Washington, D.C. on behalf of forensic science. And they work very hard, and they've had a lot of success over the years securing monetary support for crime laboratories and also coroners and medical examiners and so forth. And like all good things, you can start to get some challenges that creep into a situation like this. And one specific challenge that I personally had to deal with in my career as a forensic laboratory administrator, and it had two difficult problems associated with it that were hard to solve. The first was that forensic laboratories across the United States became, over time, heavily dependent on this federal funding, which came in the form of grant programs. And my personal favorite was the Paul Coverdell program, which allowed funding to be directed to a variety of needs and priorities that were deemed important to our laboratory. There has also been considerable funding specifically for DNA testing and the testing of rape kits and other evidence associated with criminal sexual assaults. And as you can imagine, these are heavily supported by victim advocacy groups who are very strong in their demands and efforts. And so DNA testing and DNA laboratories have long been a major beneficiary of federal funding dollars. The second problem, which is the primary inspiration for today's episode and the one that I wish to focus on today as much as we can, is the fact that the vast majority of forensic science laboratories operating in the United States and around the world fall under the authority of a police commander or a police command structure or other law enforcement official. And in my judgment, based on my own experience, too many of these police administrators have taken advantage of federal funding by reducing ever so slightly the main operating budgets of their forensic laboratories. In other words, if I'm a police administrator and I can fund training or buy supplies using federal grant funds, then that's money that I don't have to provide from my own budget. And so I can spend our agency's money on the stuff that I actually care about as a police officer, which includes cars and holsters and body armor and, providing training to police officers and police commanders and other things that support our primary police mission. This, however, is called supplanting. And supplanting is considered a serious violation of federal rules on how grant funds are to be used. Forensic grants, and I don't personally know of an exception to this rule, are only supposed to be used in addition to an agency's base operational budget or funding from its own agency. But this is very difficult to monitor and very difficult to hold police agencies accountable when they don't use federal grant funds in compliance with these federal rules. And they inappropriately use these federal funds to replace monies that would normally exist in their budgets in the absence of those funds, which is what supplanting is. Now, just to be clear, my concern as your host here is not the political or fiscal nuances of these grant programs or how they're justified or how the money is spent or distributed. My concern is the negative impact that police culture is having on forensic science labs in the United States. And what seems to be happening in Washington is exposing some of these problems in a way that we haven't seen before. In in my career as a forensic laboratory administrator, my teams benefited tremendously from federal support without question. But at the same time, it was very clear to me that my access to federal funds, the access that I had as a forensic laboratory administrator to federal funds or federal support lowered the enthusiasm of my police commanders in their advocating for our laboratory in their annual budget negotiations, whether it was with the county or with the state. And in the interest of transparency here, my current professional activities in private practice are primarily focused on training and professional coaching, and just over half of my clients come from forensic science laboratories. It is quite often that I receive calls from laboratory administrators who tell me that the only way they can hire me is if their grant funds are approved. And usually they are, and I'm quite grateful for that. I just want to be clear and disclose that potential conflict or that potential interest, that interest that I have in this issue. But the problem to which I seem to have gained a front row seat is watching the cultures of so many law enforcement organizations fail in their responsibilities to give their laboratories the funding and support that they need independent of federal funding. I think you can make a strong case that most sheriffs, police chiefs, and directors of state police have never been very enthusiastic about directing their money to forensic laboratories when they could be spending that money on things that police officers need in doing their jobs, things that police officers care about. But with the access we've had to federal funding in forensic science, one of the downsides, and there's always a downside, is that in many ways it subsidized the internal cultural deprioritization of forensic science within many of these agencies. And when I say deprioritization, I'm not just talking about money here. I'm also talking about culture and leadership and professional effectiveness. One story that I have to tell you, and I'll never forget this, and it really shaped my opinions about a lot of these issues. I had an opportunity to give a presentation. This was out in San Diego, as I recall, to give a presentation at the International Association of Chiefs of Police meeting, which is hard to do. And so I was really grateful that I was able that my abstract was approved. And so this was going to be, I believe it was the first meeting that I had ever attended of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And so I had to complete a registration form. And even though I was a speaker, I still needed to register for the conference. And so it was a fairly lengthy registration form. And I remember there was a section in the form where I was asked to more or less identify the law enforcement function that I specialized in. In other words, what was because law enforcement and policing, that's a big enterprise, and there's a lot of things that happen within policing or within law enforcement. So there was this long checklist of functions that you had to check off. Things like, patrol, corrections, records, finance, all these different types of law enforcement functions. And I was absolutely stunned to see that forensic science was not on the list. And I'll never forget it because I thought to myself, my goodness, you have arguably the largest, I believe it is, the largest law enforcement agency in the world, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And it forgot that forensic science is a part of the operations of many police organizations, certainly in the United States. Sometime after that, we were, and I talked about this in my previous two episodes, forensic science laboratories were really getting beaten over the head by activists in the criminal justice reform movement, as we talked about. And you could hear a pin drop coming from the police command community of the United States. Nobody coming to the support of their forensic science laboratories. And that got my attention. We have a current situation now where federal funds are on the chopping block. They're being looked at more critically now. The money does not appear to be as available to forensic science laboratories as it was prior to our current presidential administration. And again, I'm not making political judgments here, nor am I trying to push a particular political perspective. But I used a tool that I have at my disposal that I use for research. It's a large language model that allows me to do very comprehensive searches of the news and the internet and so forth. And I wanted to see as our forensic science leaders are trying their best to advocate for forensic science in Washington, D.C. during what appears to be pretty difficult times. I was curious what the community of police commanders, police officers had to say about this problem. You know, what do our police chiefs have to say? What do our sheriffs have to say about this access to federal funding for forensic science laboratories? And by and large, there has been no response. Crickets. And if anybody has any information out there to correct me on that, please send me that information to John at criticalvictories.com, and I will certainly post a correction in an upcoming episode. But as of right now, let's just say that the response is anemic to the point of being practically non-existent, and that also includes district attorneys. Nothing. So the forensic science community has a really interesting problem right now. Federal funding programs in support of forensic science are on the chopping block, as I said, and it seems to remain uncertain how this is going to play out. And leaders within the forensic science community are understandably advocating for these programs and the continuing federal support to forensic science in the United States. You know, we don't have the resources we need. We can't keep up with the cases. We need more people. We need more training and so forth. But this is all happening at a time when violent crime rates appear to be plummeting. The number of cases are plummeting, which means the amount of evidence is plummeting. We discussed this issue of crime stats with Jeff Asher, and this was in episode 90. If you'd like to take a look at that, that was really interesting. And I would encourage you to follow Jeff on his Substack page. And we have to remember that in addition to the crime rates coming down, you have the situation where the primary customers of our forensic science laboratories out there, police chiefs, sheriffs, district attorneys, judges, and their membership organizations, don't appear to have anything remarkable, substantial, or newsworthy to say about this. So how the heck is that going to be perceived by the elected officials who make decisions about the federal funding of forensic science laboratories? Even their customers don't seem to be too upset about this. You know, we really have some good people they're working very hard, as I said earlier, to keep the federal government engaged in forensic science matters. And I think that that's a really good thing. I think that's very important, and it needs to continue in some form or fashion. And to the extent that some may disagree with my take on all of this. They might argue that, Collins hasn't examined a piece of evidence in 15 years. He hasn't been in charge of a forensic laboratory since 2012, or he isn't privy to what's happening behind the scenes in Washington, D.C., or other venues where these forensic issues are being kicked around. He doesn't serve on any boards of forensic science or police organizations. And all of that is true. So what the heck do I know? Well, I'll tell you what I know. I have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours in coaching sessions and training workshops with forensic laboratory professionals. I get invited to teach workshops at forensic labs, to speak at forensic labs, to work with leaders and scientists in forensic labs. And the administrators of these laboratories are often very generous with their time, asking me if I'd like to take a tour of their laboratory or sit down with me to discuss their challenges and the things that they're trying to accomplish. I get a front row seat to their cultural challenges and their administrative pressures, the things that are keeping them up at night. I certainly don't purport to know everything or to have, all of the answers, but I can say with 100% certainty that nobody's ever had the vantage point that my career as a professional coach, a professional facilitator, an author, a training instructor, the vantage point that all of these things have given me, and I would not trade it for anything. I really would not. And I think the thing that I want people to understand as they listen to this or as they watch this on our YouTube channel, especially those who do not work in forensic science, is that forensic science professionals out there have a profoundly positive impact on our criminal justice system, as I talked about in our previous two episodes. They help to keep the entire enterprise steady and focused on the truth. Forensic science professionals, in many ways, are a really, really strong mitigator against things like prosecutorial misconduct, legal misconduct, or prosecutorial or legal incompetence. And yes, federal funding can really help these individuals and their organizations, these people that are working in our forensic science laboratories or in our crime scene units or in our medical examiners or coroner's offices. But the problem that does not get talked about in the forensic science laboratory community specifically is the quality of leadership and support that is provided to public forensic laboratories by their parent police organizations. And how could they talk about it? These are their bosses. But what my professional practice has taught me and really forced me to contend with on a regular basis is that many forensic laboratory experts and their administrators out there are really hurting. Their career experiences have not turned out to be what they thought it would be, which, to be candid, is one of the primary reasons I wrote my book, 50 Situations Awaiting Every Forensic Scientist. You cannot be a true advocate for the profession of forensic science if you're not dealing with the cultural dynamics that drain forensic professionals of their energy and enthusiasm. And federal funds can't necessarily solve this problem. I wrote about Sheriff uh, Sheriff Leon. Forgive me, I don't have it in front of me. Sheriff Leon Lott, I believe it is, down in South Carolina. In my book, The New Superior. And sorry if it sounds like I'm plugging books here. That's not my intent, but it's relevant to the discussion. I did some consulting work several years ago down there, um, and was just blown away by how much positivity there was among the forensic personnel for their sheriff. It was really striking, and to some, and unfortunately unusual. And I used that experience to make a point in the book about why police management styles and police culture have a history of so many problems, but also why it can be a force for good when it's done right. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to share some advice to our police commanders out there who are responsible in some form or fashion for the operation of a forensic science laboratory or maybe even a system of multiple laboratories. And I give this advice because I remain convinced that any large-scale separation of forensic science laboratories from police organizations is not going to happen in my lifetime, if ever. But every police commander has the opportunity and responsibility to be competent in how they support their forensic personnel and forensic operations. And so I have five things specifically that I want to share and express, and I hope you will take these as words of encouragement. And if you happen to be a forensic laboratory professional working in a police agency, I hope you will forward this episode on to your police commanders. Well, the first is more at the national level, and that is that your police membership organizations out there, IACP, national sheriffs, national chiefs of police, major county chiefs, major county sheriffs, those types of organizations. Not to mention here the district attorneys or judges out there because they fall into this too. But your membership organizations have to be invested in forensic science, fully invested. If you want to be in the forensic science business, then you have to be willing to conduct a forensic science business, which includes supporting forensic organizations in Washington, D.C. You cannot keep your mouth shut when your forensic laboratories, in particular, are getting beaten over the head with unfair criticisms or other kinds of ideological attacks. When you do that, you're sending the message that forensic science is just not that important to you. And if that was the case, then you shouldn't have anything to do with forensic science, much less run a forensic science laboratory. So make sure that your agency is building its expertise and its capabilities in being able to advocate for forensic science and your agency's efforts to support forensic science causes. And to the extent that you participate in larger membership organizations, make sure these police membership organizations are enthusiastic and genuinely interested in forensic science. Second, you have to include your forensic laboratory leaders in the executive decision-making processes of your agency. It is absolutely critical that there be lines of communication between your laboratory and your police command structure, not just after consequential decisions are made and you go out and you tell everybody about the decisions that you made, but while consequential decisions are being made. And I'd encourage you, not only as leaders, but as organizations to ask yourself these questions. Is forensic science really important to this agency? Is it important to me as a law enforcement commander? Is there mutual trust between the sworn command structure and the leadership of our laboratory? If not, then why not? How can we fix that problem? How can we make sure that that what is important to our forensic science laboratory remains also important to our entire agency? Third, prepare your annual budgets independent of federal funding support. Create a budget or a spending plan, depending on what you call it, that allows your agency to provide its forensic science services to your customer agencies, and take pride in it. Take pride in your ability to do that independently. Unless you are a federal agency, federal funding is supposed to be for filling in gaps, for going above and beyond normal operations or dealing with temporary hardships. Federal funds are not supposed to subsidize your general day-to-day operations. And when we allow that to happen, it weakens the credibility of these grant programs. And I believe that this is going to be an ongoing problem in the forensic science community, and I hope that that problem can be fixed. Number four, as I discussed in both the new Superior and 50 situations, treat your civilian employees with respect and make sure they have career paths that allow them to contribute and find meaning in their work and to feel supported and encouraged by their upper command structure. They are just as important as your sworn officers. Period. That is not debatable. In too many police agencies operating police agencies that are operating forensic science laboratories. This is not happening. Civilians are treated like second-class citizens, and it's a very serious problem, and it will weaken our entire criminal justice system if we are unable to attract and retain the talent that we need to meet the needs of the criminal justice system. And finally, number five, and I have to admit this one's quite important to me professionally. For those law enforcement agencies that operate forensic science laboratories, do not waste the opportunity that this experience and this responsibility can have for the culture and effectiveness of your entire agency. My opinion continues to be that if or when sworn police commanders have the thoughtfulness, the skill, the nuanced knowledge, the education, the attentiveness, the curiosity, and the sensitivities to provide strong support and encouragement to their forensic science laboratories, then they will also have, by default, as a natural consequence, the ability to dramatically enhance the quality, productivity, efficiency, and enjoyment of their entire work environment, their entire organizations, including sworn and civilian employees alike. You have to have a special way about you as a police agency to be successful in supporting your forensic laboratory operations. And so I'd like to suggest something that I think can help greatly, and that is to measure the engagement of your people each year, without exception, sworn and civilian, including your forensic science personnel. If you are a police agency and you have strong engagement scores from your forensic laboratory personnel, then you're doing something right. You're really doing something right. And in my view, that is going to make you, if it hasn't already, a world-class law enforcement organization. But you got to measure it. And so in that regard, just to add, I will share here that I have a couple of resources to support this effort. The first is our command coaching program for sworn police leaders. You work directly with me. It's a 4-session expanded coaching engagement that's aimed at helping police commanders become more effective, more trustworthy, and better able to improve the effectiveness of their teams. We also have an organizational engagement assessment that we can do for teams and organizations. We can do it for forensic laboratories. We can do it for police agencies. And if you do this on an annual basis, which you should, then you afford yourself the opportunity to keep tweaking how you lead your organization and continually improve so that eventually you have an across the board, top to bottom team of contributors who are enthusiastic, energized, and who trust their organizational leaders. So please reach out to me directly if you want to take advantage of any of those resources. Just reach me directly at john@criticalvictories.com. That's john@criticalvictories.com. And so in closing here, and I'm going to have more to say about command coaching and police culture in an upcoming episode because I think there's a lot of interesting things that we can tap into that will really go a long way to helping improve our police agencies out there and growing the professionalism of the policing enterprise. But I can't help but feel that something significant is happening with regards to the funding of forensic science laboratories at the federal level. And it's probably too soon to say exactly how it's going to play out. But to me, it's unmistakable for better or for worse. But in the meantime, each and every organization that operates a forensic science laboratory, whether it's with federal support or not, really needs to take pride in the operation, funding, and support of that laboratory. And please hear me when I say this, that those law enforcement agencies that that oversee a laboratory or system of forensic laboratories, you actually have a wonderful opportunity to leverage this responsibility so that it has a powerful and positive impact on your entire culture, on your on your presence in the communities you serve, and how your agency is perceived by other decision makers and stakeholders, including the elected officials who fund your agency. Again, if you have the competencies to be effective supporters and managers of forensic science laboratories, then you will have the ability to run a first-class law enforcement organization. But if you don't, then you might be wasting a really valuable opportunity to create cultural benefits within your organization that no federal dollar can buy. So thanks again for joining me, everyone, and we will see you next time for a great conversation with the ISHE Forensic Leadership Alliance as we discuss some of the top leadership issues facing forensic science today. You will not want to miss it. We'll see you then.